And we again rededicate ourselves not only in the struggle to emancipate other territories in Africa. Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent.
African, not American, is how we reppin' shit. With the squad, forward always, taking back our politics, refusing to back down the line. Spewing from these colonists, we know the truth. Deception works no more, about to run this shit. Freedom.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Ancestors' Voices. We are so happy you are here with us today. We first want to start by giving honor to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And I appreciate you all so much for being with us. I am going to be facilitating a majority of today's discussion, while Baba Ajamu is going to start us off and then close us out. So I will pass it to him.
All right. Greetings. Happy day to you all. We had a week away from the program last week, but we had a full weekend of organizing activities. I spent all weekend organizing African Liberation Day and then some security trainings of organizing groups, political education trainings out of town. So it was a very long but productive weekend. Glad to be back here this week. We welcome you to this week's exciting episode of our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And today's topic, a very critical one, cis African women, allyship for queer communities and Pan-Africanism. We're going to be talking about this. This is not something that you have heard talked about, and the people you hear talking about it don't know what the hell they're talking about. So we're glad that you're here so that you can get a more scientific approach, because we are the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And what that means, if you don't speak English or you don't understand English or you don't understand any language, is all means everyone. So that means we're not trying to uninclude any African people in our struggle for Pan-Africanism. We want all African people. It's not the some African People's Revolutionary Party. It's not the only heterosexual people's African People's Revolutionary Party. It's the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So we stand on that, and we are going to be talking about that. Shukura is going to be speaking primarily from her vantage point as an African woman, a cis, or if you're older, heterosexual African woman, and allyship, what that means. You know, how do we work with our queer folks in our community to ensure that they know they are loved and supported? Whether we understand who they are or not is completely irrelevant. They may not understand who you are. I don't understand who the hell you are. So that's not the point. The point is that if we want unity, we want it. If we don't want unity, we don't want it. We're not playing these games, right? We want unity. That means I have to be larger than my ego, larger than my limited perspective of who's important in the world. I have to be about it. And that means unity. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And again, we give honor and respect to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. If you go back and look at their history, their linguistic history, they as a people don't have words historically that define gender in their languages. And if we look at our African ancestors, a lot of us can't face it because we don't want to deal with anything that's outside of what we already believe in. And then we wonder why we'll never get ahead thinking with that kind of limited, narrow perspective of the world. But even us, we have many languages that don't have these gender references in it. There's a lot about our history that would shock a lot of us because of our narrow-mindedness, would shock a lot of us. And a lot of us, we can't see it because we only look at the world through the lens that we already understand. And all we do is go around looking for continued validation for what we already believe. We don't challenge ourselves. I don't do that. I read all kind of stuff I don't believe in. That's why I'm so strong in my convictions. You know, you got to try to get in a discussion with me. You got to know what the hell you're talking about. And it's not just me. That is what the political education process that we have has taught us to do. And I'm proud of that. I'm honored by that. So you can go to the next slide, Shukura, and I'll let you take over, and I will close us out at the end.
Thank you. Appreciate you. All right. Okay, you all. So, as you know, maybe this is your first time with us. We do our ancestors' voices. That is the name of today's seminar. We do our ancestors' voices every on Sundays at 4 p.m. Pacific. And this organization hosted this seminar is known as the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You can say the AAPRP for short. We are also in conjunction with the All African Women's Revolutionary Union. And one of the things that I love best, and I will say this again later in the seminar, one of the things that I love best, Baba Ajamu just said it, is that we really encompass all African people, and the name is in the beginning of our organization. So, because of that, we are based out of Africa. We are not based out of Canada. We are not based out of Sacramento. We are not based out of Milpitas. We are based out of Africa because that is where our problems have originally begun. And because of that, we are organizing within African countries, trying our best not only to address the issues on the soil of the African continent, but also transcending into doing the work in the diaspora as well. Not to say that we're not seeing the importance of doing the work in the diaspora. Clearly, we just had African Liberation Day in Oakland a couple of weeks ago, so we do see the value of that. Earlier this year in March, we had International Women's Day event in Oakland, so we see the value of doing work in the diaspora. But as I said before, the problem with African people, whether they know that they are African or not, whether they were born on African soil or not, because Dr. Kwame Nkrumah says, you are not African because you were born in Africa. You are African because Africa was born in you. So whether or not people know that they are African or not is irrelevant. What we focus on is the fact that the reason for the treatment of African people today, the reason for the health disparities, the reason for the economic challenges, the reason for the job wages that are not paying fairly, the gender wage gap that is not paying fairly, the reason for these inequities is because the continent itself is under attack, and the resources that come from that continent that should be owned and controlled by the African people are not. And so, because of that, you have entities like Portugal, you have entities like Britain, you have entities like Israel that find it very beneficial for their greed for them to go to Africa and steal and steal and steal resources and keep stealing them. You have entities like France that are stealing resources from Niger and powering the Eiffel Tower right now. Even though 1 in 3 households in Niger, their electricity goes out constantly. I mentioned to you when I was in Cuba in December that we had rolling blackouts in Cuba again because the US empire has made it their mission to make everybody else miserable so that they can continue to obtain their greed and meet their own self-interest, profit and gain and needs. So because of that, like, this is why African people are in the state they're in. But you just heard me say Israel and you just heard me say France. So this is also why Palestinian people are in the state they're in. This is also why poor people from Ireland are in the state that they're in. Okay. So again, like, we're going to constantly be making these connections, right? That was the theme for African Liberation Day this year. We are all one. Our struggle is one. And so we're going to continue to draw those connections so that you all can see them. You just heard from Baba Ajamu. I am his daughter, ideologically and physically, biologically, and we are very happy to do this presentation for you each week. We are both longtime party members. Baba Jamu has actually been in the party going on 42 years now, whereas I am still new, but I did grow up in the party as a YPI, or what we call a Young Pioneer Institute member. And now as an adult, I'm a very proud and active member. I believe next February will be 7 years that I've been active in the party. So yes, very excited for that. And then I just wanted to highlight the book that you see at the bottom of the screen, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, written by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. This book is basically our pathway and guiding light, if you will, to not only creating the All African People's Revolutionary Party, but also helping us to kind of see what it would look like if we were to have other organizations that were in alliance with the AAPRP and also wanted the one unified socialist Africa goal to be accomplished, because we believe in that as the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And this is why we are in connection with the Pan African Congress. This is why we are in connection with the Pan African Independent Party of Guinea Bissau. This is why we are in connection with the Marxist, I believe it's the Kenyan Marxist Socialist Group out of Kenya. We are in connection with these different organizations because they believe in a one unified socialist Africa. We also believe in that. And we don't necessarily need to have our chapters set up everywhere. If an African country already has a presence, then we can just work with that organization again to achieve one unified socialist Africa. Achieving one unified socialist Africa means that we would start to control those resources that I mentioned earlier and actually be able to decide and determine how those resources are distributed, how they gain profit, how we bring in profit, what's the return on interest, like whatever all of that looks like, we would be able to be deciding that. And because of that, it would literally change the course for African people everywhere. Everywhere. It would change the course. So the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare is a guiding light. And if you're not really sure how the conditions for African people can change, you should read the book because he lays it out step by step. What it means for you to gain alliances with other militaries and other countries, what it means for you to unify your education system, what it means for you to unify your financial literacy. He lays all of that out in terms of how Africa needs to be free in order for the conditions for African people to change. And again, when I say Africa needs to be free, I'm saying different countries like France and Britain should not be coming over there and getting the resources and taking them and being greedy. The African people should be the one and only deciding factor for how those resources are distributed. All right. Okay. So we mentioned this a little bit, but I just want to bring this back just so we can see this again, especially because this is officially the start of the slide presentation. So why does the All African People's Revolutionary Party focus on Africa? And what does that have to do with me being a cis woman who is speaking to you about allyship with queer folks? Well, actually, it has everything to do with it. For starters, the AAPRP focuses on Africa because, as I just said to you, that is the basis of the problems that we face as an African people. And whether you identify as being straight or whether you identify as being queer, you are facing those same problems if you are African. The only difference is if you have multiple intersections in addition to being African, then that means you're going to experience a lot more oppression than someone who is just on that very basic level. But you're still going to be experiencing disparities. You're still going to be experiencing mistreatment. You're still going to be experiencing dehumanization. And a lot of people who are ignorant because they don't know how to separate their own individual oppression with the larger question at hand at how we can connect other oppressions to our oppressions, right? I would say that that takes a certain level of maturity, actually. Baba Jamu mentioned earlier, like releasing the ego, like acknowledging that this is bigger than yourself and acknowledging that you have a role and a responsibility to change the course of action, not just for yourself because you're experiencing that oppression, but for anybody else who is experiencing oppression. And I'm going to talk to you about some actual strategized ways that you can do that in just a couple of slides. But I want to focus on why we as a party focus on Africa, because we understand that the problem started with the transatlantic slave trade. And so we need to acknowledge that being able to undo all of that is one of the best ways that we can gain our independence. It's not enough that Ghana has achieved independence. It's not enough that other countries have achieved independence. You still have neo-colonists who are still trying to go over and still trying to get back control of those resources. They are trying to undo the independence that has been achieved. You see? So we need to not only make sure that all of these countries are independent, which is what Nkrumah was talking about, a United States of Africa, but he also was talking about how just because it's 53 different countries doesn't mean it can't be a one unified Africa. We can't necessarily say that having one type of currency is the only way to go. But thanks to Muammar Gaddafi, he suggested that we have at least one shared currency. And that is the main reason that he was assassinated. He wasn't saying that we should only have one. He was saying it would be nice if the entire continent had one shared way that you could exchange and barter and pay for materials and, purchase other things. And he was right. How are we going to separate the colonial borders? How are we going to undivide the colonial separations if we can't even agree that we can all at least use one type of currency to travel around the 53 different countries and be able to do what we're doing? And so, with Africa being a primacy and being our primary struggle, we want Africa to be independent, but we also want Africa to be united. And we also understand that a United States of Africa would make it that much harder for any neocolonialist or any imperialist or any capitalist to try to come and take over, because we would be a united front and we wouldn't tolerate that. We would have systems in place to protect that from happening. We would have allies such as Cuba, right? We would have allies such as Venezuela. We would have allies that would be there to have our backs and to assist and to support us, to give us weapons if need be, right? Just like Cuba did when the Algerian War broke out, right? Like, this is what that's going to take, you all. And so we focus on Africa because we understand that Africa is the key to us achieving freedom. That's why. So if that's why we as an organization focus on Africa, then why does society focus on everything but Africa? Well, I think that it's important first to acknowledge that the enemies that we are facing as African people, and again, you haven't heard me talk about a straight African person or a queer African person, because we are all united. Okay. I really want you to hear me saying that. You haven't heard me talk about that because it's not about that. It's about us as an African people being under attack, our land being under attack, our resources being under attack, and us acknowledging that being able to fight back is the best way we can do that if we are a united force. So the enemies of African people, okay, they have convinced many of us, those that are not in organizations that are working for justice, they have convinced people who are unfortunately not accepting their African heritage and quite mistakenly believing that they are indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. They have found ways to confuse a lot of us, that actually the capitalist system not only has been the best thing that has happened to African people, but because we believe it is the best thing, that this is why we have systems in place to protect capitalism, instead of really starting to be critical on how harmful capitalism has been to us. You know what the oppressor is doing, what the enemies are doing while we're so busy protecting capitalism, showing up and doing the things that we think are patriotic? You know what they've been busy doing? They have been busy continuing to rob us. As I just said, going to the continent and stealing all these resources. But that's not enough. They also have been robbing us of a truth, of justice. They've been robbing us of the actual knowledge of what has happened to our people. They've been robbing us of the connection between our struggle and other people's struggles. They want us to see it as separate. They don't want us to see that Palestinians and us are one. They don't want us to see that poor people in Ireland and us are one. They don't want us to draw connections between Asian descent people and what has happened to them. They don't want us to draw connections that in places like Filipinas, right? In places like the Philippines, there has been colonization, just like there's been colonization on the continent. Like, they don't want us to make those connections, you all, because if we start to make those connections, then we can see that it's bigger than us, which is what we should have been doing already. We should also see that because it's bigger than us, this is why we need to connect with other people. And this is another favorite thing that I have about African Liberation Day, as well as Pan-African Women's Day, is we as an organization understand that other people's struggles are our struggles connected. So this is why we invite the other people to come to our events and to talk about their struggles. We are very happy to create space for Palestinian folks to come and speak. We're very happy to create space for Filipinx people to come and speak. We're very happy to create space. 2 years ago, we had the Ambedkar King Study Circle, a group of Indian organizers who were very much against the caste system because they argue that it is perpetuating white supremacy. We totally agree with that. And we were so happy to have them there because it was really great to see the different levels of organizations who were fighting back and trying to organize their people, and seeing the connections to the Pan-African struggle as a whole, right? So this is what that looks like, you all. And the system doesn't want you focusing on Africa, because if you focus on Africa, you'll start to make these connections. You'll start to see what it means for all of this stuff to be connected. Because of African Liberation Day and because of all the organizing we've been doing the last couple of weeks, I've been finding myself in different spaces. And I noticed that one comrade was saying that they didn't really think that there needed to be a presence of queer people at some Pan-African events. And my thing was, why would you feel that way? Because you're seeing them as separate, you're seeing them as not together. And more importantly, they didn't think that it was necessary that we connect some of our ancestors, such as Malcolm X, to having queer oppression being spoke about. And my thing was, Malcolm X was a progressive thinker and was coming in to understand very quickly that oppression was facing all people. He didn't just focus on African oppression. He didn't just focus on oppression in the diaspora, especially after he went home. He came back and he started drawing deeper connections because he saw that what was happening in the Congo was also happening in Harlem, just like Marcus Garvey saw that what was happening in Jamaica was also happening in Miami. And Kwame Nkrumah saw that what was happening in British London was also happening in different parts of Canada, right? Like all of these people, Shirley Graham Du Bois, are starting to see these connections and strongly, strongly building this Pan-African lens where they can clearly see what is happening and how there are very similarities among African people everywhere. We are at the lowest bottom of the toll everywhere. And I'm talking economically, we're at the bottom of the pole, but I also want to speak to our health disparities. We are the sickest of the sickest people everywhere. It doesn't matter if we have health insurance or not, right? So these are things that we have to really think about, you all, because the comrade is saying they don't think that if Malcolm X were alive, he wouldn't want to hear from queer people at the jazz festival. And my thing is, you don't know what Malcolm X will be saying right now. A, because he didn't get a chance to really progress to that. He was taken from us and murdered. But B, I would actually argue that Malcolm would be in favor of hearing from queer folks who are talking about their oppression, because the quote on your slide shows me further supporting that evidence. One of my most favorite quotes by Malcolm is he saying, you know, when you start to replace I with we, even the word illness becomes wellness. And I just don't think that he meant that just for straight people. Again, I think that he would have needed to develop more of a maturity, of course. But Malcolm X was a very humble person. And I just can't see him being like, no, I only mean straight people deserve to be well. Like, that just doesn't sound like something he would say. He was humanistic at heart. He was a beautiful soul at heart. He cared about people. He cared about all kinds of people. So I think that it's important to make these notions and to call it out. I also think that we all need to kind of look deep within ourselves and think about like what is happening to us as a people, right? Like, are we acknowledging that we all have privilege in some way, shape, or form? I understand it's uncomfortable if you admit that you have privilege. I get that. But just because you don't think you have privilege doesn't mean that you don't have privilege. And I think it's dangerous if you're not willing to really look within yourself and to really reflect on how you have navigated these spaces in your life, how you have advanced in these spaces in your life. The bottom line is every single one of us has privilege. And I would argue anyone who is listening on this seminar right now has some of the highest levels of privilege, because that means you have access to devices like this and devices like the computer that I'm on. That means you have access to Wi-Fi. That's a privilege. Everybody doesn't have Wi-Fi. Okay, maybe you're at a coffee shop right now and you're using someone else's Wi-Fi, but you still had the means to get to that coffee shop. You also can sit in a coffee shop without someone theoretically harassing you. Again, privilege, right? Because we're talking about a class distinction. Clearly, if you were coming into the coffee shop and you didn't look put together, they would ask you to leave. They would call the police on you. So everyone has privilege. Every single person has privilege. The question is, with you knowing how much privilege you have, because you may not even know, how are you using it to change the circumstances for other people who clearly have less privilege than you? That is the question, you all. That has always been the question. It's not your fault that you have privilege. It's not my fault that I have a PhD. I have ancestors and family and community, and I worked my ass off and it damn near killed me. I worked my ass off and it damn near killed me. But I did it because of my ancestors, because of my community, because of my family, because they had my back. But that still doesn't mean that with the PhD, I don't acknowledge that I have privilege. It also doesn't mean that cis, straight European white men still don't have more privilege than me, even if they have less education. So even with the PhD, they will still make more money than me. African men who have less education than me will still make more money than me. It is important to say that, you all, because people get offended and they get all up in their feelings when they think that I am personally attacking them. I'm not personally attacking you. I'm stating facts based on the reality that society thinks you are more important than me and you deserve to make more money than me, even though I just went to school for 9 years to get a degree. One of the highest degrees, may I add. And it's still not enough in the society because I wasn't born with the right genitals to be considered enough. Okay. Like, this is the reality, you all. We need to think about this. And don't get me started on being a straight person and your privilege. We're going to talk about that at the next slide. That is a completely different topic. And straight people need to acknowledge that and face it and look in a mirror and just be like, yeah, I'm privileged just because I'm straight. There's so much privilege with that. So much privilege with that. Okay, so let's move forward since I talked about that. So as we move into the next slide, we have to really start to think about our own experiences. And I want to start by saying, if you are identifying as a cis straight woman, I am talking to you right now. Now, clearly, if you are a cis straight man, you can, see how you would fall into this conversation. But I can't speak to your experiences because that's not who I am. That's not how I identify. And I know better than to, place myself in places where I have no business being placed. Okay. So if you identify as a straight cis man and you see some connections, great. If not, the best thing you can do is just be humble and still try to see how you can take stuff from being just a general ally, even though some of these bullets are directed specifically towards African women who are straight. Okay. So I just say that to say that as African women, we know very well what oppression feels like. We experience it every day when people say sexist, inappropriate things to us. We experience it every day when our bodies are objectified and when we are discounted because of our bodies, when people make comments about us and underestimate us because of our bodies. Like, we know what that feels like every day. We know what that feels like every day. To this day, I invest in the certain kind of headphones because I don't want people to talk to me. Like, I don't know if women identifying people have to think about those kind of things, but I do because I don't want certain people to talk to me. So I know to put certain headphones in, A, where I can still be aware of my surroundings and have my head on a swivel, but B, because I am trying my best to create a barrier where I don't have to deal with nonsense, catcalling, whatever that looks like. If you have privilege and you don't have to think about buying certain headphones, this is exactly my point. This is exactly my point. And you need to humble yourself. You need to humble yourself. So this is like really what it comes down to and how we have to think a little bit deeper about that. African women knows what oppression feels like. So this should not be too far off the mark for us because we already know what it feels like to be oppressed. I was in a space recently where I literally had to explain to an African male identifying person about patriarchy. And they completely refuted it. They completely disregarded it. They told me that it was a made up concept and that African men did not hold privilege. They were some of the most oppressed people on the planet. And I just thought to myself, as you're saying this to me, I can feel my heart racing and I can feel my blood boiling because you are so privileged to sit there and say that you are not privileged. That is a privilege to sit there and say that you are not privileged. We need to think about that, you all. We need to think about that. And for you to come at the victim and make the victim feel like the oppressor is abusive. That is abusive. And we need to think about that. That is not okay. Not okay by any means. We also have to think about how, as African women, we have the power for the roles to change within society. It was also Dr. Kwame Nkrumah who said, to measure the education of a country, it can best be measured by the education of its women. I would alter that statement now and say by the education of non-male people, marginalized genders, right? Non-binary folks, right? Like, I would alter that and include those other terms in there. But I think he was still onto something because those folks hold space where they can make additions and make changes for the rest of the family, the rest of the family structure to be impacted, right? If we decide as a family that we should start eating broccoli with every meal, 9 times out of 10, just be honest. If you're a male identifying person, are you going to go to the store now and make sure there's enough broccoli for all 7 meals for dinner that night? Probably not, because that might not be how your family structure is set up. If it is, good for you. That's awesome. But are you going to cook the broccoli? Are you going to steam it? Do you have the seasonings to steam it? Like, again, that's where the partnership comes in. And if it's not a partnership, more than likely it'll fall on your partner to make sure that that is happening. There's a lot of people who don't even see the value in that, but that's where that comes from. If we want to change the laundry detergent in our house, think about who makes those decisions. It's probably not the male identifying person. That's just the reality. So because of that, like, this is what Kwame Nkrumah was talking about the degree of a country's political education best being measured by the education of this woman, right? Or a non-male person, marginalized, non-binary folks. We can also even think about how just because there is a constant oppression that we are facing. So I would argue that, there is a sexist action that takes place every millimeter of a second. That's what I would argue, right? Like, it just happens so much, just as frequent as you are blinking your eyes. You experience sexism, and you're either perpetuating sexism, you're speaking out against it, or you are the victim of it, right? Because sometimes, you know who you are. Sometimes you find yourself in spaces where a sexist act is taking place and you don't do anything to speak up about it. But you didn't contribute to it either. So you're not a part of the problem, but you're not a part of the solution either, especially if you didn't do anything to prevent it from happening. Again, using your privilege, right? What does that look like for you, right? So these are things that we have to think about. So because African women experience constant oppression, that means that we need to know best how to not apply the oppression Olympics. You heard me say that before when I learned that in Cuba, but it's so important. We're going to repeat it again today. That's the problem, you all, is not only is capitalism informing us and educating us to be individualistic, to be self-centered, to be only putting our oppression first. Like I said, I was in the space with the African man and he could not see past his own trauma. And I understand that. But what he didn't understand was I have a subsequent level in addition to the main level that he's talking about. That would be completely dumb for me to say that I don't suffer from white supremacy, that I don't suffer from racism. Of course I do. That's why I get paid less, because I'm an African woman. It's African first before woman, and then it's woman, right? Like that's where it is, right? So I mean, that would just be dumb if I were to say that. So again, like, we have these levels here, but we need to humble ourselves to understand that oppression Olympics is not going to help us get where we need to go. Where we need to go is understanding that these different levels of oppression need to be connected. We need to be willing to talk about them without centering ourselves. We need to decenter ourselves, and we need to be open to hearing about other people's experiences. It's going to be discomforting. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen, and it doesn't mean it shouldn't happen just because it's going to be uncomfortable. That just means we need to work on not centering ourselves as much. That's what that means to me. In the past, when we've done seminars, we've heard Baba Ajamu, for example, say that he goes to women identifying marches, but he doesn't identify as a women identifying person. We've heard him say that he supports and offers self-defense trainings to trans folks, and he doesn't identify as a trans person. That's what allyship looks like, you all, where not only do you not need to center yourself, because I'm sure that they would like him to speak on behalf of a cis man's perspective. But knowing my dad like I know him, he's not going to hold space for that. He's not going to take 20 minutes on the microphone. He's not going to create this whole space where we need to be talking about the African man struggle. He's going to these marches to help these trans people. He's going to these marches to help these women identifying folks. That is his intention. That is his aim. That is his goal. He's not going there to propagandize and to promote his personal perspective. That was a great alliteration. Did you hear it? He's not going there to do that. So again, like, how do we uncenter our own trauma and understand that it's bigger than us? That is so important, you all. And some of us are going to really have to work on that. We're going to have to really work on that. I also want to say that, like, again, we're incorporating the All African People's Revolutionary Party, right? And there's so much with that, because we need to be thinking about how we can't just be down with the oppressed people and then their straight struggles, right? So like, if they identify as straight, like, we want to change circumstances, make the world better for them. But for the queer identifying folks, we don't want to engage with their struggles. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. Africa is not going to be free if we don't incorporate every single African person that exists. This includes differently abled Africans. It includes Africans who don't think that they are fully African. It includes Africans that think that they are indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. This conversation includes all of them, you all. We don't get to leave anybody out. Who are we to do that? We don't get to leave anybody out of this conversation. They all deserve to benefit from that. And we need to think deeply about that. All right. I think my screen is freezing up a little bit. So hopefully I'm okay now. I think I'm okay. All right. So I want to bring some more health statistics into this conversation because if you are an African cis woman, you might not be seeing just how serious this problem is with queer folks not being valued and recognized in society. And so I want to bring some statistics into the conversation to really help you see, A, that being a straight person is actually more healthy, believe it or not. And B, there is a lot of privilege with being straight and having better health care. Now, of course, I just did a presentation just a couple of months on maternal mortality. I also just did one on African Women's Month, and I did one on African women and the health issues that we face. So if you are an African woman, please do not leave this seminar saying, she said that gay people are sicker than us. That's not what I just said. That's not what I just said. What I'm saying is that queer folks have some of the worst health outcomes in the world when compared to straight folks, but it's not to discount the poor health outcomes that African women are also facing. This is exactly what I'm saying. See, we can have simultaneity. We can understand that African women are very sick and we deserve better. And we can understand that queer folks are very sick. And in some cases, they are more discounted and more ignored and more delayed care because of the fact that they are queer. Because being straight is a privilege. And I'm going to keep saying that. I am going to keep saying that. And if it makes you uncomfortable, that means you need to think deeply about why you are uncomfortable. Are you uncomfortable because I'm saying lies to you right now? Or are you uncomfortable because there's actually some truth and you've never actually thought about it? You need to think about that. You need to think about that. So I just want to start by saying when you are not able to be yourself because you are yourself and you are disrespected for that, that is definitely going to have some consequences, not only on your self identity, but on your personal health, on your physical health, on your physiological health, on your mental health. And so it's not a surprise that queer folks would have really bad mental health outcomes. That's not surprising to us. We shouldn't be surprised. Society does not promote and perpetuate and allow them to be themselves. And I'm trying to think of an analogy that I think might best help straight folks understand just how nerve-wracking and how dehumanizing it is. So if somebody disrespects a queer person's pronouns, I want you to think about how the equivalent to that would be if someone was calling you the wrong name, excuse me, even though that is not your name. For me, I would say if someone insists on calling me African American, but you may not be where I am. Maybe you identify as African American. So take your pick on which of the two analogies you best identify with. But if somebody is calling you Susan and your name is not Susan, and they continue to say, well, you know, Susan, and you've already corrected them and said, that's not my name. My name is blank, whatever your name is, right? And you continue to say that after a while, you're going to start to get upset because no one likes to feel disrespected. And if you're like me and you try really hard to respect other people and then they disrespect you, that does not feel good. That does not feel good. And if you're like me and you've been doing the work on yourself, then you now understand you can't even tolerate it. You have to set up a boundary so that it can't even keep happening. And now there's labor involved with you having to protect yourself because this person keeps calling you Susan when you have already said that is not your gosh darn name. You have already said that. So the question is, why do they keep calling you that? What are they trying to get out of it? Are they trying to get a rise out of you? Are they trying to make you feel ignored? Are they trying to make you feel unheard? Are they dismissing you? Does your voice not matter? I know that this sounds familiar to you, but what you need to understand as an African straight woman is that queer folks feel the same way when we mispronoun them, when we don't even take the time to ask them, do you have any pronouns? It's not that big a deal of a question. Some people may not even have pronouns, and that's okay. I just always try to ask, oh, what are your pronouns if you have any? Just so I can make sure I am giving you the respect that you deserve. Because I would like to make sure that my pronouns are being respected. That's why you see them on the Zoom right now. I work really hard to make sure that I can advocate for myself and let people know how I identify. So the fact that I've wrote my full name out there and you're still calling me Susan is a problem. Or the fact that you keep calling me Black or African American when I've already told you I don't identify as that. That's not me. You're not talking to me. And now I'm starting to shut down because clearly you're not talking to me. And now I'm missing vital information because I'm ignoring you because you are ignoring me. Clearly, we could see how that would affect someone's health, right? Clearly, we can see that, right? Again, I want to bring this analogy into the fold just to make sure that we understand. So, just like white supremacy, patriarchy, and racism affects my life as a straight cis woman, we also have to understand that those three systemic oppressions affect my self esteem as well. Heterosexual preferences, in addition to the ones I just stated, so for queer folks who suffer from white supremacy, patriarchy, and racism, they also suffer from heterosexism, right? And we don't talk about heterosexism as much because usually we're talking about homophobia and transphobia, and those are important. We should talk about them. But heterosexism is a systemic oppression, especially if you don't identify as being heterosexual, right? So, in addition to the ones I just mentioned, if you suffer from heterosexism, that means you are also in a position where, as a queer person of color, you are being devalued, you are being ignored simply because you are not straight. Okay, looks like I froze up again. Simply because you are not straight. I'll just repeat the last thing I said. I said it before, I'll say it again. Being straight is a privilege. It is a privilege. And if you don't agree with me, I'll ask you two questions. Right now, if you are in some type of intimate relationship and you want to buy a card, a greeting card for your partner, can you buy a greeting card that represents your relationship with ease? Meaning, can you go to the store right now, go to the greeting card aisle, read through some of the greeting cards, figure out which brand you want to support, whether it's Hallmark or Mahogany or whatever the other greeting card companies are, and then can you find the section for partner or marriage or relationship or boyfriend, if that's what you call your partner or girlfriend or whatever? Can you find the section that adheres to your relationship with your partner right now? And can you pretty much spend roughly about 10 minutes ish to find a card that you think best represents your relationship? It might even take you longer than 10 minutes. But within that time of you being at the store, can you find a card that you would want to buy? If the question is yes, that's because you benefit from straight privilege, you all. And I'm saying that to say, are there cards that represent non-binary people who are dating trans people? Have you seen that section? I'm asking you. Non-binary people slash trans. Have you seen that section? I'm not talking about like a woke conscious store that's randomly in Oakland. I'm talking about like a traditional greeting card aisle where capitalism and imperialism have been woven in and out of that aisle. That's what I'm talking about. Because the greater number of us are not going to be able to find this random card store in Oakland that is conscious and woke. Okay. The greater number of us probably forgot about the situation where we needed to celebrate it, or maybe we were just trying to buy a card to be, special or whatever, and we may not have the access, we may not have the means to get to a specific store, so we're just going to a general store. It might be a grocery store, it might be a pharmacy store, whatever. And the greater number of those stores does not have a section that represents that. This is exactly my point. If you can buy a card that represents your relationship status, there's 9 times out of 10, it's because you benefit from straight privilege. Because the greeting card companies profit greatly off of straight relationships. And they are either not interested yet and transcending over into queer identifying relationships and making propaganda and promotional items to sell, or maybe they are and they just haven't become more popular. Whatever the case may be, there's still areas of the world where you're not going to be able to find a card like that. And I would start with the Mid-South USA. That's what I would start with. You will never find a non-binary trans card in Memphis, Tennessee. You will just never find that. So we think about the queer folks in Memphis and how they can't even buy a card, you all, to express their love to their partners. That's privilege. You need to understand that. That is privilege. You see the graph on the slide indicates that if you were a queer identifying person, your ability to survive while you were laboring your child is greatly decreased just because you are queer. This is not by accident, you all. This was data that was collected actually in 2022. So it's actually outdated, actually, but that was the best slide I could find, the best graph I could find. But the numbers are higher now because a lot of healthcare rights for trans folks and non-binary folks and queer identifying folks have been completely annihilated. They've been completely annihilated. So people are actually more susceptible to dying while they give birth to their children. And notice that the numbers are higher than for straight cis people. Did you notice that? Did you notice that? Okay, I just wanted to make sure you noticed it. Okay. All right. Another question. If you don't believe that being straight is a privilege, can you openly hold your hands partner in public without fear or ridicule? Can you openly hold your hands partner in public without fear or ridicule? If you have to think about it, maybe, maybe not. But 9 times out of 10, we don't even think about the privilege of being able to hold our partner's hands because it comes so naturally to us because that's not a reality where we have to worry about our life being in jeopardy or danger, right? And then I said it before, I'll say it again. Queer identifying folks usually, because they can't be themselves in public spaces and because they can't be themselves in medical spaces, because providers don't have as much information about how to make them feel valued and prioritized, because providers don't have enough access, they don't respect their pronouns. Queer identifying folks are more likely to delay their care. They're less likely to get the medications that they need. And unfortunately, there's even a lot more talk about how the different surgeries that queer identifying folks want, like the top surgery, for example, is not being covered with a lot of new insurance policies that are coming out. So again, when people are just trying to be themselves, you all, they are blocked constantly. And that is going to have mental implications. It's going to have physical implications. A lot of times, what's happening to you mentally is because of something that's happening to your body internally. And eventually, your brain will catch up and will start to reflect on how that has been harming you as well. So, these are things that we have to think about, right? Oh, I'll just highlight this quick little image I put here. I forgot to say this. Another quote by Malcolm X. If you are not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. And I definitely think that with all this homophobic rhetoric and transphobic rhetoric, Malcolm was more mature than he even knew to say that. Okay. So just important to make those connections. All right. So what does allyship look like? This will be on my last slide before I turn it over to Baba Jamu. So first, I think as African cis women, we need to understand that honoring queer folks, honoring their stories, talking about their stories, highlighting their stories and their struggles, that's nothing we need to be intimidated by. I think a lot of times people think that because they are not focusing on their own oppression, they should be intimidated, thinking that the spotlight will be taken off of them or people won't focus on them as much. I mean, to some extent, that might be true because that's just the ebb and the flow of how society functions. Like, if you think about it, we're not talking as much about police brutality when it comes to African people like we were during the global COVID-19 pandemic. Now the conversation has shifted to the inhumane treatments of ICE agents with our indigenous comrades and whatnot. But that doesn't mean that people have forgotten about police brutality with African folks. It just means that we are now understanding, like, it's not just police, it's federal agents, it's anybody who is pro-capitalism, anybody who is pro-imperialism, anybody who's been trained to do Krav Maga out of Israel. Like, we just need to connect all of that and understand that none of these folks are our friends. That's what we need to understand. So it's not to say that we need to be intimidated because it's not about us. We just need to understand that there's a larger issue at hand and we have a responsibility. That brings me to the next point. We need to be aware of the space that we hold. And I mean, check your privilege. I mean, check your space that you're holding mentally, check the space that you're holding physically, emotionally. If you call yourself an ally, are you going to these spaces to support these groups? And then you are taking up space as a straight person. You are taking up space because you're emotionally impacted. Like, you need to be aware of that. And they need you to be there to help, not to become somebody who needs help. Okay. I remember I was with a group of Africans, and there was someone who was not African, and they were having a really hard time. And it was a very emotional space that us as Africans were in because we were on a old plantation space. And the non-African person literally like broke down and started crying. And I was thinking to myself, that's not That's not. Like we get to cry right now. Like I'm not saying they didn't have a right to have feelings, you all, but what I'm saying is like being aware of your privilege. This is clearly a space where the people most directly impacted should just have space to just be. And this person wasn't able to allow that to us. And because African women are so nurturing, because we are so comforting, because we are so kind, because we are so empathetic, because we are so codependent sometimes, because we are so humanistic, and because we are so selfless, of course, we welcomed this person to cry on our bosoms because that's what we do as African women. That is what we do. And so I'm not surprised by that, but I just remember thinking this could have been done differently. This could have been done differently. And like I'm just saying, like, be aware of your privilege. Check your space that you're holding. Check that. One of the things we walked away from when I went to Cuba in December, the Venceremos Brigade, was they talked about death without drowning. And they were teaching us that as a community agreement in terms of how we hold space and trying really hard to say what you needed to say quickly and with discipline instead of just talking on and on and on. But I would argue death without drowning can even be translated into how you physically, emotionally, or mentally hold space, right? So I just would encourage us to think deeply about that. Also, Viva Cuba and Viva the VV, okay? All right. Allyship doesn't reduce your struggle just because you're elevating other struggles. All right. That's your job as an ally, is to advance this person's struggle. That's your job, to advance these people's struggle based on your privilege. That is your job. You can do things that non-straight people cannot do because you are a straight person. Just like men can do things that non-males cannot do. European people can do things that non-Europeans cannot do. We all need to recognize our privilege and use it. What are we willing to risk? We need to be thinking about that. Simultaneity, another concept I took from the Venceremos Brigade in December. Multiple things can be true at one time. This is why you don't need oppression Olympics, because we are all oppressed, unfortunately. And enough is said. We are all oppressed. So we need to come together. We have been divided before. And where has that got us? Where has that got us being divided before? Nowhere. So, what would the harm be in coming together and putting aside our individual differences to see a larger issue at play and organizing ways to address it? Know your place. Know your place. What does your allyship require of you? How does that change daily? Are you asked to speak at an event on Saturday, but on Sunday you're showing up for a protest and you're not speaking? Are you thinking that you need to be speaking at every event you're going to as an ally? That's your first mistake right there. Make sure that you understand what's going on. I have family members who are organizing queer communities of color, and I just said to them, as a straight person, if there's anything I can do, let me know. That doesn't put pressure on them. That doesn't, I don't tell them I'm coming to their event. Like, I don't need to do all of that because I have nothing to prove as an ally. I am an ally because I understand what my privilege and my role is, and I'm doing the best I can to try to give them space to use that, to exploit that. Okay. We need to check our privilege and we need to use it. Humility. Just because you say you don't have privilege doesn't mean that you don't have it. Lacking humility is the fastest way for ignorance to take over. Because if you're not willing to be humble to the fact that maybe there's things that you're missing, maybe there's things you don't see, maybe there's things you don't see because of your privilege that you say you don't have, that can be problematic. And I would say it to you like this. Now I'm speaking to African men. African men, if you tell me you don't hold privilege, I guess my question to you would be, is that the same thing as 10 years ago when Donald Trump was in a radio interview? He said that he didn't have privilege. Now, if you're hearing me say 10 years ago that Donald Trump said that he didn't have privilege, as a person of color, as an African person who knows that he is a terrible individual who represents a terrible system, you're probably outraged that he said he didn't have privilege because you disagree with that and you know it's simply not true. He holds nothing but privilege. When the rest of us were dying from COVID-19, he got a treatment within 20 minutes. That's definitely privilege, if not other examples, right? But my question to the African men would be, but if you're upset that Donald Trump said he doesn't have privilege, I can't be upset that you're saying you don't have privilege because that would still be the same argument. You do have privilege. I argued earlier that you get paid more than I do. I would also argue that you don't have to invest in certain headphones. I would argue that you don't have to potentially have your head on a swivel all the time because there's a potential sexual predator who's out to get you. And even if there is, you're probably in a better position because of your privilege, where people might be less likely to bother you and mess with you. Now, that could be a good and a bad thing, because African men are under attack and people believe that you are a criminal. So I understand that that can be, dicey either way. But my point is, we need to have more humility in how we reflect, A, on what our privileges are, and B, on the privileges that we don't even know we have, and be willing to learn more about them. I am constantly trying to dig deeper into the things that I think I knew about myself that I'm learning I still have. And this road to me being an ally for queer people has been a game changer for me, especially me thinking about how I don't have to worry about finding a greeting card that represents my relationship. Like, these are the things that we need to think about, and it's going to cause us to be uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth it. The last thing I'll say before I pass it to Baba Ajamu is, again, you have privilege, so what? What are you willing to do about it? How are you willing to sacrifice it? And who is going to benefit from your sacrifice? How are you willing to be uncomfortable? That is the question. How are you willing to be uncomfortable? And I'll pass it back to you, Baba Jamu. Thank you.
Madasi Asante Sana, Ghosty, thank you very much, Shukura. That was very, very good. I'll just say, in reference to you talking about Malcolm X and Malcolm's position on this question of supporting the queer community, I think that I should say that and you know this if other people don't. I'm only here because of Malcolm X. I discovered Malcolm X when I was 15 years old. I started reading. I've always been a person that read. I don't, I'm not someone that you can just tell me stuff and I understand it. That I have to have a analytical understanding. So I've read and I've read dozens of books about Malcolm. I've used my whole life to travel through his footsteps. I've been everywhere that he lived. I went to Ghana and studied where he was. He was my motivation to make Ghana my first visit in Africa, and have been back there as well as, of course, all over the continent outside of that. So because I've studied Malcolm, I know that Malcolm did articulate some positions on this question. I know a lot of these people that claim to be into Malcolm don't either ignore that or probably just don't know anything about it. But if you didn't know, Malcolm was very good friends with James Baldwin, who was an author and a very articulate author about the conditions of African people in this society. And of course, James Baldwin was also unapologetically queer. And would state that publicly back at a time where that was not being done on a widespread basis. And Malcolm, coming out of the Nation of Islam, of course, was not an organization that was particularly supportive of our queer community. And a lot of people today want to judge Malcolm based on his time in the nation. But as Malcolm came out of the nation, he made it very clear in statements he made regarding not only just his relationship with James Baldwin, but his understanding of the issue that he judged people based on what they do. And I think that's what we all need to learn how to understand. Judging people based on what they're willing to do. I'm sorry, I'm not going to denounce somebody because they're non-gender binary or because they're queer or whatever the case may be. If they're putting their life on the line to liberate our people, and I'm supposed to separate myself from them in favor of a bunch of cowardly African men who I haven't seen do a goddamn thing to risk anything for our people. And I'm saying that as someone who risks myself for our people all the time. So if you're not doing that, miss me with that bullshit. I'm not trying to hear it. I'm not trying to hear you. All you are is flapping your damn gums. So thank you for being here today. Join us next week. We're going to be talking about this voter suppression issue here. It's not anything new. It's just another latest form of effort to keep us down. And we're going to be talking about the voting process as a whole, like how we should begin to redefine our understanding and relationship to it. So join us for that. The QR code in the upper left-hand corner, the red and white one, you can get information about AAPRP programs. You can visit our Forward Ever shop. You can buy clothes that have revolutionary African slogans on them, and 100% of the proceeds support the African Revolution. So do that. if you're here in the Sacramento area or anywhere in Northern California, or even if you're coming to California to visit or whatever the case may be, every Thursday night, 6 to 8 p.m., we have community self-defense. You not only learn how to defend yourself, but also how to build community better. And we have political education as well. So join us. It's at 2775 Cottage Way, like cottage cheese, Unit 15, 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15. No registration, just come on out for that. You can look at the African Liberation Day virtual program, as well as the program we had in Oakland and others that are on YouTube. Go to the AAPRP YouTube page, and you can look at all of the programs. We encourage you to do that. We encourage you to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP-intl.org. You can watch a video, get more information on how you do that. QR code in the bottom right. The black and white one is to become a monthly sponsor to Burkina Books, which is the work of the APRP in Burkina Faso and Niger. Become a monthly sponsor. We're bringing in revolutionary literature. We're doing that on a broad scale basis for our people at home. We need to have that happen instead of Huck Finn and Run Dick Run and Run Ass Run and all those right-wing religious mercenary books that have come to dominate what our children read at home in Africa. So go ahead and do that. My book in the upper right-hand corner, the QR code, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence is only $8 US, only 8 slave-holding George Washington dollars. It's a good book in terms of talking to you about how you organize community block to block, and 100% of the proceeds go towards the anti-fascist work that I do on a regular basis. Just last Monday, I was out of town here training a boatload of people on self-defense and how to organize safety for events that they do. These are people that do a number of events, Black Lives Matter events, all of these types of things, Pride, whatever they're doing that's bumping up against the status quo. I want them to know how to knock the hell out of people that want to try to stop them from standing up for justice. So support the book, and the more you do that, the more you can help me do that work. Again, 100% of the proceeds towards the anti-fascist work. If you have the book, order it. If you don't, get a book club, have people order it. Call your local bookstore, ask them to order it. It's only $8, so they can order it and make a $2 profit, sell it for $10, whatever they want to do. And that way they can, help with this whole process. Call your library and do the same thing. Do something. Like Bunchy Carter told us, that wonderful leader for the Black Panther Party from LA, who was a former Slauson gang member. He said, do something, Black people, even if you just spit. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Forward ever.